The stagecoach lurched violently to one side, throwing Victoria Greene against the wooden frame hard enough to bruise her shoulder, and she knew with absolute certainty that something had gone terribly wrong on this frozen January morning in 1882. She had been traveling for 3 weeks from Boston, Massachusetts, making her way across the vast expanse of America to reach Kansas and the man who had answered her advertisement. Andrew Fletcher, a rancher outside Hays City, had written her 6 letters over the past 4 months, each one more earnest than the last, describing his life, his land, and his hope for a companion to share it all with. Victoria had memorized every word, clutching those letters like lifelines during the long, uncertain journey westward. At 22 years old, she had exhausted her options in Boston after her father's death left her penniless, and her mother's relatives wanted nothing to do with her. The choice had been simple: become a mail-order bride or face destitution in a city that had no place for unmarried women without means. The driver shouted something incomprehensible over the howling wind, and Victoria pressed her face against the small window, peering through the thick curtain of snow that had begun falling an hour ago. What had started as light flurries had transformed into a blinding storm, the kind that her fellow passenger, an older woman traveling to visit her son in Hays City, had warned her about with grim satisfaction. "Kansas blizzards ain't like your eastern snow, Mrs. Henderson had said, her weathered face creasing with concern. "They come on fast and mean, and they kill folks who don't respect them." The stagecoach lurched again, more violently this time, and Victoria heard a terrible cracking sound followed by the panicked whinnying of horses. The world tilted sideways, and she had just enough time to brace herself before the coach tipped completely over, throwing both women against the opposite wall in a tangle of skirts, luggage, and screams. Pain exploded through Victoria's side as something sharp jabbed into her ribs. The coach had landed on its side, and through the broken window above her, snow poured in like water through a breach in a ship's hull. Mrs. Henderson groaned beside her, clutching her arm at an unnatural angle. "Are you hurt?" Victoria managed to ask, her own voice sounding strange and distant to her ears. "My arm's broke," Mrs. Henderson said through gritted teeth. "But we got bigger problems, girl. We need to get out of here before we freeze or get buried." The driver's voice came from outside, muffled by the storm. "Ladies, can you hear me?" The axles busted clean through and one of the horses broke his leg. I had to put him down. I'm going to ride the other horse back to the last way station, get help. It's maybe 5 miles back. You stay in the coach, stay warm, and I'll be back quick as I can. Victoria struggled to push herself upright, her traveling dress soaked from the snow still falling through the broken window. "Wait, don't leave us here. Take us with you." But the sound of hoofbeats was already fading into the white void beyond the overturned coach. Mrs. Henderson's face had gone pale, and not just from pain. 5 miles in this storm, on one horse. He'll be lucky if he makes it at all, and even if he does, by the time anyone gets back here. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Victoria's mind raced through her limited options. They were somewhere on the road between Ellis and Hays City, which meant they were still at least 15 miles from their destination. The temperature was dropping rapidly as afternoon faded toward evening, and the snow showed no signs of stopping. If they stayed in the overturned coach, they might be buried by morning. If they tried to walk in the storm, they would almost certainly get lost and freeze to death. "We have to do something," Victoria said, more to herself than to Mrs. Henderson. "We cannot just sit here and wait to die." "Girl, I can't walk nowhere with this arm, and I wouldn't know which direction to go even if I could. That storm's so thick, you can't see 5 feet in any direction, At least in here we got some shelter from the wind. Victoria knew Mrs. Henderson was right, but every instinct screamed at her to move, to act, to do something rather than passively accept whatever fate the storm had in store for them. She began sorting through the scattered luggage, looking for anything useful. She found 2 wool blankets, a small oil lamp that had miraculously survived the crash intact, and in her own trunk, the warm winter coat she had packed specifically for her new life in Kansas. "Here," she said, draping one blanket over Mrs. Henderson and wrapping the other around herself. "We will make ourselves as warm as possible. The driver will return with help. We just need to wait." But as the hours crept by and the temperature continued to drop, Victoria's confidence began to waver. The oil lamp provided a small circle of warmth and light, but it was rapidly consuming the limited fuel. Outside, the storm raged with undiminished fury, and the snow had risen high enough to completely cover the window above them, plunging them into a dim, tomb-like darkness relieved only by the lamp's feeble glow. Mrs. Henderson had fallen into a fitful sleep, moaning occasionally from the pain of her broken arm. Victoria tried to stay awake, rationing the lamp oil, but exhaustion and cold were powerful adversaries. Her thoughts drifted to Andrew Fletcher, the man she had never met but had agreed to marry. Would he even know what had happened to her? The stagecoach was expected in Hayes City tomorrow morning. When it did not arrive, how long would it take before anyone organized a search party? And even if they did, how would they find an overturned coach buried under what must be feet of snow by now? She must have dozed off despite her best intentions, because when she jerked awake the lamp had gone out, and the darkness was absolute. The cold had seeped through her blankets and coat, settling into her bones with a deep, numbing ache. She could not feel her toes anymore, and her fingers were stiff and clumsy when she tried to pull the blanket tighter around herself. "Mrs. Henderson," she whispered into the darkness. There was no response. "Mrs. Henderson." Victoria reached out, her numb fingers finding the other woman's shoulder and shaking it gently. Mrs. Henderson groaned, a weak sound that was somehow more frightening than silence. "So cold," Mrs. Henderson mumbled. "Can't feel nothing anymore." Victoria knew she had to do something. They could not stay here any longer. Even if it meant venturing into the storm, even if it meant getting lost, staying here was certain death. She began pulling on her coat, wrapping her scarf around her head and face, preparing herself for what she knew was likely a suicidal decision. "I am going for help," she announced. "You'll die out there," Mrs. Henderson said, her voice barely audible. "We will die in here if I do nothing." Victoria found her boots and forced her numb feet into them, lacing them with fingers that barely responded to her commands. "The road must be here somewhere. If I follow it, I will reach either the way station or Hayes City eventually." "You're a fool, girl, but a brave one." Mrs. Henderson coughed, a wet, rattling sound. "If you make it, tell my son Henry that I tried to reach him. Tell him his mother loved him." "You will tell him yourself when they rescue you," Victoria said firmly, though she harbored serious doubts about whether anyone would find the coach in time. "I will send help as quickly as I can." Climbing out of the overturned coach proved nearly impossible. The door was buried under snow, and the window above her was small and high. She had to stack luggage to create a platform, then push through the accumulated snow that had piled against the window. The moment she broke through to the outside air, the wind hit her with physical force, stealing her breath and nearly knocking her back into the coach. The storm was worse than she had imagined. Visibility extended perhaps 3 feet in any direction before everything dissolved into a swirling white chaos. The wind drove snow into her face with stinging force, and the cold was so intense it made her lungs ache with every breath. For a moment, she seriously considered climbing back into the relative shelter of the coach. But Mrs. Henderson needed help, and more importantly, Victoria refused to die here in this frozen wasteland without even meeting the man she had traveled so far to marry. She had not come all this way, risking everything on the promise of a new life, only to give up now. The overturned stagecoach was already half buried in snow, and Victoria tried to fix its position in her mind as a reference point. The road should be nearby, though with all the snow, it was impossible to tell where it might be. She chose a direction that she thought might be correct and began walking, or rather, struggling through knee-deep snow that seemed determined to drag her down with every step. Within minutes, she had completely lost sight of the coach. Within 10 minutes, she had lost all sense of direction. The storm created a disorienting sameness in every direction, and she realized with growing terror that Mrs. Henderson had been right. This was suicide. She was going to die out here, alone, frozen, and lost, and no one would even find her body until spring. But she kept walking because stopping meant dying, and Victoria Greene had not survived 22 years of disappointment and hardship only to surrender now. Her father had always told her she was stubborn as a mule, and if stubbornness was what it took to survive this nightmare, then she would be the most stubborn woman in Kansas. Time lost all meaning. She walked through what might have been an hour or might have been 10 minutes. She honestly could not tell. The cold had moved past pain into a strange numbness that frightened her more than the pain had. Her legs were moving mechanically, but she could barely feel them. The wind had found every gap in her clothing, and her face was so frozen she could not even feel the snow hitting it anymore. She stumbled, went down to her hands and knees in the deep snow, and for a long moment, she could not find the strength to get back up. It would be so easy to just stay here, to close her eyes and let the snow cover her, to drift off into the sleep that would end all this struggle and pain. But something in her refused to give in. With a strength she did not know she possessed, Victoria forced herself back to her feet and continued walking. One step, then another, then another. It was all she could manage, all she could focus on. Just one more step. She did not see the dark shape looming out of the storm until she walked directly into it. Her numb hands registered something solid, something that was not snow or wind, and her frozen mind struggled to process what it might be. A tree, a building. She ran her hands along the surface and felt rough wood planks. A wall. She had found a wall. Following the wall, her hands traced its length until she found a corner, then another wall, and then, miraculously, a door. She hammered on it with fists she could no longer feel, making barely any sound through her thick gloves. She tried to call out, but her voice emerged as a weak croak that the wind snatched away instantly. The door did not open. Victoria's heart sank. Perhaps this was an abandoned building, some forgotten structure in the middle of nowhere. Perhaps she had expended her last reserves of strength reaching a place that offered no salvation at all. But she tried the handle anyway, and to her shock, it turned. The door was not locked. She pushed it open and half fell, half stumbled into the dark interior, landing on a wooden floor. The simple absence of wind felt like a miracle. She lay there, unable to move, hearing the door bang shut behind her, and then she heard nothing at all. Andrew Fletcher had been restless all day, and he could not explain why. He had ridden out to check on his cattle twice, which was unnecessary given that his hired hands, Tom and Charlie, were perfectly capable of handling the herd. He had repaired a section of fence that could have waited until spring. He had inventoried the barn 3 times, counting supplies he had already counted the day before. The truth was that tomorrow was the day Victoria Greene was scheduled to arrive in Hayes City, and Andrew was more nervous than he had been about anything in his 26 years. He had never expected to become a mail-order groom. His plan had been to court one of the local girls, settle down in the natural course of things, but eligible women were scarce in this part of Kansas, and the few available had no interest in a quiet rancher who lived 5 miles outside town. So he had placed an advertisement, half expecting nothing to come of it, and then Victoria's letter had arrived. Her handwriting had been elegant and careful, her words thoughtful and intelligent. She had been honest about her circumstances without being self-pitying, and something in her words had resonated with him. Over the course of 6 letters, he had found himself genuinely excited about meeting her, about the possibility of building a life with this woman he had never seen. And now she was arriving tomorrow, and he was as nervous as a young boy at his first dance. The storm had blown in around noon, and Andrew had watched it develop with the practiced eye of a man who had spent his entire life on the Kansas plains. This was going to be a bad one, the kind of blizzard that killed cattle and people alike if they were foolish enough to be caught in it. He had made sure his horses were secured in the barn, his stock was sheltered as best they could be, and his own house was prepared with plenty of firewood and supplies. Tom and Charlie had bunked in the small bunkhouse attached to the barn, unwilling to try reaching their own homes in town with the storm intensifying. Andrew sat alone in his main house, a modest but well-built structure with 2 bedrooms, a main room with a stone fireplace, and a kitchen that Victoria would hopefully find adequate. He had built most of it himself with help from friends and neighbors, and he was proud of what he had accomplished. As evening fell and the storm showed no signs of abating, Andrew found himself pacing in front of the fireplace, his unease growing. The stagecoach was supposed to arrive tomorrow morning, but if this storm continued through the night, there was no way it would make it through. The roads would be impassable, which meant Victoria's arrival would be delayed, possibly by days depending on how long it took to clear the roads, unless the stagecoach was already on the road when the storm hit. The thought struck him like a physical blow. The stage from Ellis usually departed in the morning, which meant it would have been on the road when the storm rolled in. Andrew moved to his window, peering out into the white chaos beyond the glass. Visibility was near zero, and the wind was howling like a wounded animal. If the stagecoach was out there somewhere, caught in this storm. He tried to tell himself he was worrying needlessly. The stage driver would have seen the storm coming and turned back or found shelter somewhere along the route. Those men knew the roads and knew the weather. They would not take foolish chances with passengers' lives. But the uneasy feeling would not leave him, and Andrew had learned long ago to trust his instincts. Something was wrong. He could feel it in his bones. By the time full dark had fallen, Andrew had made his decision. He pulled on his warmest coat, his heavy gloves, his thickest boots. He wrapped a scarf around his face and pulled his hat down low. Then he went out to the barn, fighting the wind every step of the way, and saddled his best horse, a sturdy gelding named Ranger who had carried him through more than one dangerous situation. Tom looked up in surprise from where he and Charlie were playing cards by lamplight in the bunkhouse. "Boss, where are you going in this weather?" The stagecoach from Ellis was due to arrive tomorrow morning, Andrew said, checking Ranger's saddle. "If it left Ellis this morning, it got caught in the storm." "You don't know that," Tom protested. "Driver probably turned back or holed up somewhere." "Probably," Andrew agreed, "but I will not sleep tonight if I do not check. The route passes close to here. If they are in trouble, they might be nearby." "Then I am coming with you," Tom said, standing up. "You will need help if you find them." No. Andrew's voice was firm. If something happens to me out there, I need you here to organize a proper search party come morning. Someone needs to know where I went and what I was doing. Tom looked like he wanted to argue but finally nodded. How far are you going? I will follow the road toward Ellis as far as I can. Check the usual stopping points, then circle back. If I am not back by dawn, ride into Hayes City and tell Sheriff Morrison what happened. Boss, this is crazy, Charlie spoke up for the first time. That storm will kill you. Maybe, Andrew acknowledged. But if there are people out there who need help, I have to try. He did not add that one of those people might be Victoria, the woman he had been writing to for 4 months, the woman who had agreed to uproot her entire life and travel halfway across the country to marry him. He owed her more than sitting safely by his fire while she might be freezing to death mere miles away. Leading Ranger out into the storm was like stepping into a frozen hell. The wind was even worse than before, and the snow was falling so thick and fast that Andrew could barely see Ranger's head in front of him. He mounted up, and Ranger shifted nervously beneath him, sensing his master's tension. "Easy, boy," Andrew murmured. "We are just going to take a little ride, check on some folks who might need help." He oriented himself by the position of his barn, fixing the direction of the road in his mind, and then urged Ranger forward into the storm. It was slow going, much slower than he had anticipated. The snow was deep and getting deeper, and Ranger struggled through it with determination but obvious difficulty. Visibility was almost non-existent, and several times Andrew lost his bearings entirely, forced to stop and carefully work out which direction he was facing based on the wind direction and his memory of the land. He checked the old Miller place first, an abandoned homestead about 2 miles from his ranch that sometimes served as an emergency shelter for travelers. The small cabin was empty, its door hanging open, snow drifting inside. No sign that anyone had taken refuge there. Continuing toward the road, Andrew felt Ranger stumble and immediately dismounted to check the horse's legs. The last thing he needed was for Ranger to injure himself. Finding nothing wrong, he led the horse forward on foot for a while, breaking trail through the deep snow. It took him nearly an hour to reach what he was fairly certain was the main road, though with all the snow, it was impossible to be sure. He turned toward Ellis, moving slowly, stopping frequently to peer through the storm for any sign of the stagecoach or people who might need help. Nothing. Just endless snow and wind and cold that seeped through every layer of clothing and made him question the wisdom of this entire venture. Tom had been right. This was crazy. He was risking his life on a hunch, on a feeling that might be nothing more than nervous anticipation about meeting his bride-to-be. He was seriously considering turning back when Ranger suddenly stopped and whinnied, his ears pricking forward. Andrew froze, listening. At first he heard nothing but the wind, but then it came again, a sound that might have been an animal or might have been something else. "Hello," Andrew shouted into the storm, his voice barely audible even to his own ears. "Is someone there?" No response, but Ranger was definitely reacting to something. Andrew trusted the horse's senses more than his own in these conditions. He moved in the direction Ranger's ears were pointing, leading the horse carefully through the deep snow. He almost missed it entirely. The overturned stagecoach was so thoroughly buried in snow that it looked like just another drift in the endless white landscape. Only a small section of the roof was still visible, and even that would have disappeared completely in another hour or two. Andrew's heart lurched. He had found them. But were they still alive? He tied Ranger to a piece of the exposed coach frame and began digging through the snow with his gloved hands, trying to find a way inside. The coach was on its side, and the door was completely buried. He worked his way around to where he thought the windows might be and finally cleared enough snow to reveal broken glass and a dark opening. "Hello," he called into the darkness. "Can anyone hear me?" A weak moan answered him, and relief flooded through Andrew's chest. At least one person was still alive. "Hold on, I am going to get you out of there." He widened the opening, breaking away more of the window frame, and managed to get his upper body through the gap. In the dim light, he could make out a huddled shape wrapped in blankets. "Madam, sir, can you hear me?" "Took your sweet time," came a woman's voice, weak but tart. "Thought maybe you all had forgotten about us out here." "How many are with you?" Andrew asked. "Was 2 of us. Girl climbed out hours ago, said she was going for help. I told her she was a fool, but she went anyway. Probably dead in a drift somewhere by now." Andrew's blood ran cold. Someone had left the relative safety of the coach and gone out into the storm. They could be anywhere, could have walked in any direction, could be. How long ago did she leave? Don't know. Lost track of time. Maybe 3 hours, maybe more. 3 hours in this storm. The chances of survival were minimal at best, but Andrew had not come this far to give up now. "I am going to get you out first, then I will look for your companion," he said. "Don't be a fool like she was," Mrs. Henderson said. "I can wait for proper help. You go looking for that girl in this storm, and there will be 2 bodies to recover come spring instead of 1. But Andrew was already backing out of the coach. He knew exactly where to look. There was only one structure within walking distance of this location, and if the girl had been lucky enough to stumble in the right direction, she might have found it. The old Miller place. She must have found the old Miller cabin. He untied Ranger and mounted up, turning back the way he had come. He pushed the horse harder than he should have, knowing that every minute mattered. If she had found shelter 3 hours ago, she might still be alive, but people did not last long in freezing conditions without fire or adequate warmth. The ride back to the cabin felt 3 times longer than the journey out. Andrew strained his eyes through the storm, searching for any sign of a person, but seeing nothing but snow and more snow. When the dark shape of the cabin finally emerged from the white chaos, he dismounted before Ranger had even fully stopped and ran for the door. It opened easily, and Andrew stumbled into the dark interior, fumbling for the matches he always carried. He struck one, and in its brief flare of light he saw a shape on the floor near the door. A woman in a dark traveling dress, covered in snow, lying motionless. He lit the lamp that he knew was kept by the door, and in its steady glow he got his first look at Victoria Greene. Even half frozen and unconscious, she was beautiful. Dark hair had come loose from its pins and lay in wet tangles around a face that was pale as snow itself. Her lips had a bluish tinge that terrified him. He pulled off his glove and pressed his fingers to her throat, searching for a pulse. There. Faint, slow, but there. She was alive. Andrew wasted no time. The cabin had a small fireplace, and someone, probably him on his last visit months ago, had left a supply of wood stacked beside it. He got a fire going quickly, his cold fingers clumsy but determined. Then he turned his attention to Victoria. Her clothes were soaked through, and he knew from experience that wet clothing in these conditions was more dangerous than no clothing at all. It would sap her body heat and kill her as surely as the storm itself. He hesitated, acutely aware of propriety and the fact that this woman was essentially a stranger, but propriety would not save her life. "Forgive me," he murmured, and began removing her wet coat and dress. He worked quickly and clinically, trying not to think about anything except saving her life. He stripped her down to her undergarments, which were damp but not soaked, and wrapped her in his own dry coat and every blanket he could find in the cabin. Then he lifted her carefully and moved her closer to the fire, positioning her where she would get maximum warmth without being in danger of sparks. Her body was cold, so cold it frightened him. He chafed her hands between his own, trying to restore circulation. He rubbed her arms and legs through the blankets, generating friction and heat. He talked to her continuously, though he had no idea if she could hear him. "Come on, Victoria, stay with me. You did not come all this way to die in some abandoned cabin. Fight. You made it this far. You found shelter. You did everything right. Now you just need to stay alive until you warm up." The fire grew stronger, filling the small cabin with blessed heat. Andrew kept working, kept talking, kept willing this stubborn woman who had walked into a blizzard rather than accept death passively to hold on just a little longer. Gradually, slowly, color began to return to her face. Her lips lost some of their blue tinge. Her breathing, which had been so shallow he could barely detect it, deepened and steadied. And finally, after what felt like hours but was probably less than one, her eyelids fluttered. "That is it," Andrew encouraged. "Open your eyes. Come back." Her eyes opened, and Andrew found himself looking into the deepest brown eyes he had ever seen. For a moment, she just stared at him in confusion, and then awareness flooded back along with alarm. "Where am I? Who are you?" She tried to sit up and then realized she was wearing only her undergarments under his coat. Her face flushed red. "What happened to my clothes?" "You are in an abandoned cabin about 3 miles from my ranch," Andrew said calmly. "I am Andrew Fletcher. Your clothes were soaked and you were freezing to death. I had to get you out of them and warmed up. Your dress is drying by the fire." He watched as she processed this information, saw the moment when his name registered. "Andrew Fletcher. You are Andrew Fletcher." "Yes, madam." "And unless I am very much mistaken, you are Victoria Greene." "I am." She looked down at herself, then back at him, and to his surprise she laughed. It was a weak, shaky laugh, but genuine. "This is not precisely how I imagined our first meeting." "Nor I," Andrew admitted, feeling his own lips curve into a smile. "I had planned to meet you at the stage with flowers. I had a whole speech prepared. I am sorry to have disrupted your plans." Her smile faded. "Mrs. Henderson, the woman who was traveling with me, is she?" "Alive," Andrew assured her quickly. "I found the coach before I found you. She has a broken arm, but she was conscious and talking. I told her I would send help." "You need to go back for her," Victoria said urgently. "She cannot survive much longer in that cold." "I know. But I could not leave you here alone and unconscious. You are awake now and the fire is going. I need to ride to my ranch, get my men and supplies, and then we will go back for Mrs. Henderson properly equipped." "How far is your ranch?" "About 3 miles. In this storm, maybe 45 minutes there and back." Victoria nodded. "Then you should go. I will be fine here. I have fire and shelter." Andrew hesitated. He did not want to leave her, not when she was still recovering, not when he had just found her. But Mrs. Henderson was in worse condition and more immediate danger. "There is firewood," he said, pointing to the stack. "Keep the fire going. Do not try to go outside for any reason. I will be back as quickly as I possibly can." "I understand. Go save Mrs. Henderson." Andrew stood, reluctant to leave but knowing he had no choice. At the door he turned back. "Victoria, I am very glad you are alive." Her smile was worth every minute of cold misery he had endured searching for her. "I am rather glad about that myself." The ride back to his ranch was easier now that he knew the way and had already broken trail. He found Tom and Charlie anxiously waiting, and within minutes, they had organized a proper rescue operation. They loaded a sledge with blankets, supplies, and hot coffee from the pot that had been staying warm on the stove. Tom would stay at the ranch in case they needed additional help, while Charlie would come with Andrew to retrieve Mrs. Henderson. They made it back to the overturned stagecoach in better time than Andrew's solo journey, and between the two of them, they managed to extract Mrs. Henderson from the wreckage. She was in bad shape, worse than Andrew had initially realized. Her broken arm needed setting, and she was dangerously cold despite the blankets she had wrapped around herself. "The girl?" she asked as they settled her on the sledge. "Victoria. Did you find her?" "I found her," Andrew confirmed. "She is alive and safe in a cabin not far from here. We will collect her on the way back to my ranch." "Stubborn fool saved my life," Mrs. Henderson said. "Told her she would die out there, but she went anyway. If she had not, nobody would have found me until spring." They collected Victoria from the cabin, and Andrew tried not to notice how his heart lifted when he saw her standing in the doorway, wrapped in blankets, her face flushed with color from the fire. She had managed to get her dress back on, though it was still damp, and Andrew immediately wrapped her in an additional blanket before helping her onto the sledge with Mrs. Henderson. The journey back to the ranch was slow and careful. Both women huddled together for warmth on the sledge while Andrew and Charlie guided Ranger and the other horse through the still falling snow. The storm was finally beginning to ease, though the snow was still heavy enough to make traveling difficult. When they finally reached the ranch house, Tom had hot soup ready and the fire blazing in the main room. They settled Mrs. Henderson in Andrew's bed, and Tom, who had some experience with setting bones from his time in the army, tended to her broken arm while Victoria watched with concern. "She is going to be fine," Tom assured them. "Broken arm will heal clean if she keeps it still. Mostly she just needs warmth and rest." Victoria had been given Andrew's second bedroom, the one he had prepared for her before all this chaos began. She stood in the main room now, still wrapped in blankets, looking exhausted but steady on her feet. "You should rest," Andrew said gently. "You have been through an ordeal." "So have you," she pointed out. "You rode out into that storm to search for us. You saved both our lives." "I had a feeling something was wrong," Andrew said. "I could not sit here safely while people might be dying out there." Victoria studied him with those deep brown eyes, and Andrew felt suddenly self-conscious. He was acutely aware that his hair was a mess. His clothes were damp and dirty from digging through snow, and he probably looked half wild after spending hours in the storm. "Your letters did not mention that you were a hero," Victoria said softly. "I am no hero, just a rancher who knows this land and got lucky." "You are a man who risks his own life to save strangers," Victoria corrected. "That is the very definition of a hero." She swayed suddenly, and Andrew moved quickly to steady her, his hands on her arms. Even through the blankets he could feel how delicate she was, how close she had come to death. "You need to rest," he said firmly. "We can talk tomorrow after you have slept and recovered. There will be time for everything else." She nodded, too tired to argue. Andrew helped her to the bedroom, made sure she had everything she needed, and then retreated to give her privacy. He spent the night in a chair by the fire in the main room, unwilling to sleep in case either of the women needed help during the night. As he sat there, watching the flames dance in the fireplace, Andrew reflected on the strangeness of the day. He had set out expecting to meet his mail-order bride at the stage tomorrow afternoon. Instead, he had found her half frozen in an abandoned cabin, had stripped her nearly naked to save her life, and had brought her home in the middle of a blizzard that was still raging outside his walls. Not exactly the romantic beginning to their relationship that he had envisioned. But as he remembered the strength it must have taken for Victoria to leave the relative safety of that overturned coach and walk into the storm searching for help. As he recalled the smile she had given him, despite her exhaustion and trauma, He found himself thinking that perhaps this strange beginning was somehow fitting. She had proven herself to be exactly the kind of woman he had hoped for. Strong, brave, and unwilling to give up even when the odds were stacked against her. He must have dozed off at some point because he woke to find pale morning light filtering through the windows and the storm finally reduced to light flurries. Tom was stoking the fire, and the smell of coffee filled the air. "Morning, boss," Tom said quietly. "Both ladies are still sleeping. I checked on them about an hour ago. They seem to be doing fine." "Good." Andrew stood, stretching out the kinks from sleeping in a chair. "I need to ride into town, let people know the stagecoach passengers are safe, and fetch Doc Miller to check on Mrs. Henderson's arm." "Roads are going to be rough," Tom warned. "That storm dropped at least 2 feet of snow. Then the sooner I get started, the better." The ride into Hayes City took twice as long as normal, the roads nearly impassable in places where the snow had drifted deep. But Andrew made it to town, reported to Sheriff Morrison about the stagecoach wreck, and collected Doc Miller, who agreed to ride back to the ranch to check on the patients. By the time they returned, Victoria was awake and sitting at the kitchen table, wrapped in a quilt, sipping coffee. She had managed to do something with her hair, pinning it up in a simple style that suited her. In the morning light, Andrew could see her properly for the first time, and he found himself struck silent for a moment. Her letters had not mentioned that she was beautiful, but perhaps that was because beauty was such a subjective and unimportant quality, compared to the qualities of character that had drawn him to her words. Yet seeing her now, seeing the intelligence in her eyes and the determined set of her jaw alongside the delicate features and expressive face, Andrew felt something shift in his chest. "Good morning," Victoria said, and there was a hint of shyness in her voice that had not been there the night before. "I hope you do not mind that I made coffee. I wanted to be useful." "Mind, this is going to be your home, Victoria. You do not need permission to make coffee." Andrew realized what he had said and amended quickly. "That is, if you still want to marry me. I realize we met under unusual circumstances, and you might prefer to take more time to decide, or to return to Boston if you have changed your mind." Victoria set down her coffee cup and looked at him directly. "Mr. Fletcher, I walked through a blizzard last night rather than accept death passively. I did not do that because I wanted to return to Boston. I came here to start a new life, to marry you and build a future together. One night of difficulty has not changed that decision. If anything, it has reinforced it." "Andrew," he said. "Please call me Andrew. Mr. Fletcher makes me feel like I should be wearing a suit and conducting business." "Andrew," she repeated, and he liked the way his name sounded in her voice. "Then you must call me Victoria, or Vicky if you prefer. My father used to call me Vicky. Victoria suits you better, I think. It is a strong name, and you have proven yourself to be a strong woman." Doc Miller emerged from the bedroom where he had been examining Mrs. Henderson. "Arms set well enough. She is a tough old bird. Give her a week of rest and good food and she will be right as rain, though she should not try traveling for at least a month, not until that arm starts to heal proper." "She can stay here as long as she needs to," Andrew said immediately. Doc Miller's eyes twinkled as he looked between Andrew and Victoria. "So this is the mail-order bride you have been expecting. Quite an introduction to Kansas, young lady." "Indeed it was," Victoria agreed, "though everyone has been very kind." After Doc Miller left, promising to return in a few days to check on Mrs. Henderson, an awkward silence fell. Andrew was acutely aware that he and Victoria were essentially strangers, that they had agreed to marry based on letters and the pragmatic needs of their situations, and that neither of them quite knew what to do now that they were actually face to face. I should explain my situation more clearly, Victoria said finally. In my letters, I told you my father had passed and I had no means of support. What I did not fully explain was that my father died owing debts. His creditors took everything, including our home. My mother's family wanted nothing to do with me. They had disapproved of her marriage to my father and considered me tainted by association. I had no options except to find work in a factory or become a mail-order bride. I chose the latter because it seemed to offer more hope for a decent life. You do not need to explain, Andrew said. Your letters were honest enough. I understood your situation. But did you understand that I am not a fine lady despite my education? My father was a shopkeeper, not a wealthy merchant. I can read and write and do sums, but I have also scrubbed floors and washed dishes and done whatever work was necessary. I am not afraid of hard work. Good, because ranch life is full of hard work. But Victoria, I did not write to you because I wanted a servant. I wrote because I wanted a partner, someone to share my life with. This ranch is successful enough that we are comfortable, but it is remote and the work is constant. I need someone who can be happy here, who can find satisfaction in this kind of life. I think I can be happy here, Victoria said. At least I would like to try, but I need to ask you something and I need you to be honest. Of course. Did you write to me only because you needed a wife, or was there something in my letters that made you want to know me specifically? Because if this is just a practical arrangement for you, I can accept that, but I would like to know what to expect. Andrew considered his answer carefully. When I first placed the advertisement, it was practical. I am 26 years old and I want a family. I want children to inherit this land I have worked so hard to build. And yes, I need a partner to help run the household. But Victoria, when your first letter arrived, something changed. The way you wrote, the thoughts you expressed, the personality that came through your words, I found myself genuinely interested in you as a person. Each letter made me more eager to meet you. So yes, it started as practical necessity, but it became something more, at least for me. Victoria's expression softened. For me as well. I answered many advertisements before I chose yours. Most of the men who wrote back seemed to view a wife as property or a convenience. Your letters were different. You wrote about your dreams, your land, your hopes for the future. You asked about my thoughts and opinions. You treated me like a person worth knowing. That is why I chose you. The conversation was interrupted by Mrs. Henderson calling from the bedroom, and Victoria excused herself to check on the older woman. Andrew took the opportunity to step outside, ostensibly to check on the livestock, but really to clear his head and process everything that had happened. Tom and Charlie had the situation well in hand. The cattle had weathered the storm with minimal losses and the horses were all accounted for and healthy. The ranch had emerged from the blizzard in good shape, all things considered. "So that is your bride?" Tom asked, grinning. "Pretty thing. Tough too, from what I hear." Walking out into that storm took guts. "She is remarkable," Andrew agreed. "But Tom, I am not sure what to do now. We planned to marry, but that was before. Now she is here and I barely know her and she nearly died and I am supposed to just go ahead and marry her like nothing happened." "Why not?" Tom asked pragmatically. "You both came into this arrangement with your eyes open. You have exchanged letters for months. You both know what you are getting into. Seems to me that what happened last night just proved that you two are well matched. She is brave enough to handle this life, and you are devoted enough to risk your neck for her before you even officially met. Sounds like a good foundation for a marriage to me." Andrew considered this. "You think I should just proceed as planned? Ask her to marry me?" "I think you should talk to her like an adult and figure out what you both want. But yeah, if she came all the way from Boston to marry you, and she just told you this morning that she still wants to, then I would say you have your answer." Tom's practical wisdom proved sound. When Andrew returned to the house, he found Victoria helping prepare lunch, moving around his kitchen with the ease of someone accustomed to domestic work. Mrs. Henderson was sitting at the table, her arm in a sling, looking much better than she had the night before. "There you are, Mrs. Henderson said when Andrew entered. "I have been telling this girl that she needs to marry you as soon as possible and make this arrangement official. No sense in waiting and causing talk." "Mrs. Henderson," Victoria protested, blushing. "That is between Andrew and myself." "Nonsense. I am old enough to speak plainly. You two exchanged letters and agreed to marry. You are both of age and sound mind. The fact that your meeting was dramatic does not change the basic facts. Get the preacher out here, say your vows, and be done with it. That is my advice." Andrew caught Victoria's eye, and they shared a look that was part amusement and part genuine consideration. Mrs. Henderson, interfering as she was, had a point. "Perhaps we could discuss this privately," Andrew suggested. They stepped out onto the porch, where the cold air was crisp and clean after the storm. The world was transformed into a white wonderland, beautiful and deadly in equal measure. Andrew could see for miles, the snow-covered plains stretching away in all directions. "Mrs. Henderson is not subtle," Victoria said, laughing softly. "No, but she is not wrong either. Victoria, I know we just met face to face yesterday, but in some ways I feel like I already know you from your letters, and everything that has happened has only confirmed what I learned from those letters. You are brave, resourceful, and strong. You are exactly the kind of woman I hoped you would be. If you are willing, I would still like to marry you, but I also understand if you want to wait, to take time to be certain." Victoria was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the snow-covered landscape. "I have been thinking about this all morning," she finally said. "The truth is, I have nowhere else to go. If I do not marry you, I will need to impose on your hospitality until I can make other arrangements, which is awkward for both of us. But more than that, I do not want to make other arrangements. You saved my life last night, Andrew. You risked your own life to search for me in that storm. That tells me more about your character than a dozen letters could. I am willing to marry you if you are willing to have me. Then we will send for the preacher as soon as the roads are passable," Andrew said, "which should be in a day or two once the town has a chance to dig out from the storm." Victoria held out her hand and Andrew took it, their hands clasping in a gesture that felt both formal and intimate. "Then we have an agreement," she said. "We have an agreement," he confirmed. The next 2 days passed in a strange sort of domestic harmony. Victoria helped around the house, learning the layout and routines, while Andrew went about his ranch work. They were careful to maintain propriety, never alone together for long, always conscious of Mrs. Henderson's presence as chaperone. But in small ways, they began to learn each other's rhythms and habits. Andrew discovered that Victoria was an early riser who liked to watch the sunrise with her coffee. Victoria learned that Andrew had a habit of checking on his horses last thing before bed, no matter how tired he was. They talked during meals, sharing stories from their lives, filling in the details that letters could not convey. Andrew told her about growing up on this land, how his father had claimed it as a homestead and built it into a working ranch, how he had taken over when his father passed 5 years ago. He spoke of his dreams to expand the herd, to build a bigger barn, to create something lasting that could be passed down to future generations. Victoria shared memories of her childhood in Boston, of her father's shop and her mother's garden, of the year of sickness that had taken her mother when Victoria was 15. She spoke of her father's slow decline after that, how he had never quite recovered from the loss, how debts had accumulated despite his best efforts. "He was a good man," Victoria said, "but he was broken after my mother died. I think he grieved himself to death." "And then you were left alone to deal with the aftermath," Andrew said. "That must have been frightening." "It was terrifying," Victoria admitted, "but also clarifying in a strange way. I realized I had two choices: let fear paralyze me or take action to change my circumstances, so I took action. By becoming a mail-order bride. By taking control of my own destiny as much as any woman can in this world. I chose you, Andrew. Out of all the advertisements I read, all the letters I received, I chose you because your words resonated with me. I made that choice freely, and I do not regret it." On the third day after the storm, the roads were clear enough for the preacher to make the journey from Hayes City. Reverend Thomas arrived in the afternoon, a jovial man in his 50s who seemed delighted at the prospect of performing a wedding. "I heard about your adventure," he said to Victoria. "The whole town is talking about the mail-order bride who walked through a blizzard and the rancher who saved her. Quite the romantic tale." "Romance had very little to do with it," Victoria said dryly. "Mostly it was cold and terror." "Well, it will make a fine story to tell your grandchildren someday," Reverend Thomas said with a wink. The wedding was held in Andrew's main room that evening, with Mrs. Henderson, Tom, Charlie, and Doc Miller, who had ridden out to check on his patient and stayed for the ceremony, as witnesses. Victoria wore the best dress she had managed to salvage from her luggage, a simple but elegant blue gown that brought out the warmth in her brown eyes. Andrew wore his Sunday suit, feeling stiff and formal but wanting to mark the occasion with proper respect. The ceremony was brief and traditional. Andrew and Victoria stood before Reverend Thomas, hands joined, and spoke their vows. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Andrew leaned in to kiss his new bride, a chaste press of lips that nonetheless sent warmth spreading through his chest. "I now present Mr. and Mrs. Andrew Fletcher," Reverend Thomas announced to their small audience, and everyone applauded. Mrs. Henderson had insisted on baking a cake despite her broken arm, directing Victoria through the process, and they celebrated with cake and coffee and toasts to the happy couple. It was simple and homespun, nothing like the grand weddings that happened in Boston society, but Victoria found herself surprisingly content. As evening turned to night and their guests prepared to leave or retire, Victoria felt nervousness flutter in her stomach. She and Andrew had not discussed the practical aspects of their wedding night, and she was not entirely sure what to expect. Her mother had died before giving her any kind of instruction on marital relations, and her knowledge was limited to vague understanding and overheard whispers from other women. Andrew seemed to sense her nervousness. After everyone else had retired or departed, he found her in the kitchen, pretending to be busy with cleaning that did not need doing. "Victoria," he said gently, "we should talk." She set down the dish she had been washing and dried her hands on a towel, turning to face him. "Yes. I want you to know that I do not expect anything from you tonight. We may be married, but you have been through a terrible ordeal and you are still recovering. We can take our time with everything. There is no rush." Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by a strange sort of disappointment she did not fully understand. "That is very kind of you." "It is not kindness. It is respect. Victoria, this marriage is going to last for the rest of our lives. We have time to become truly husband and wife in all ways. Tonight, I just want you to rest and feel safe in your new home." She found herself stepping closer to him, drawn by something she could not quite name. "Andrew, I appreciate your consideration. But I also do not want you to treat me like I am fragile or broken. I survived that storm. I am stronger than I look." "I know you are strong," Andrew said. "I have seen proof of that, but strength does not mean you have to rush into everything. We barely know each other." "Then perhaps we should take time to know each other better." Victoria was not entirely sure where this boldness was coming from, but she found herself reaching out to take his hand. "We are married now. We are going to share a life, a home, a bed eventually. I would like to start, as we mean to go on, as partners." Andrew's eyes searched hers, looking for certainty, and whatever he saw must have satisfied him because he nodded slowly. "Then let us talk. Let us spend this evening learning more about each other. And whatever happens beyond that, we will decide together." They sat by the fire and they talked late into the night. Andrew told her about his hopes for the ranch, his plans for the spring, his relationships with Tom and Charlie, who were more like brothers than employees. Victoria shared her love of reading, her skill with numbers, her secret dream of perhaps one day teaching children, even though she knew that married women rarely held such positions. "Maybe you could teach our own children," Andrew suggested. "When we have them." "You want children?" Victoria asked. "Very much. A house full of them if we are blessed, but I want them to come from a strong marriage, from parents who care for each other and can give them a stable home." "I want children too," Victoria admitted. "I always imagined having a large family." It was lonely being an only child. As the fire burned low and the hour grew late, they found themselves sitting closer together, their conversation growing more intimate and personal. Andrew told her about the loneliness of the past few years, of working hard to build something lasting but having no one to share it with. Victoria confessed her fear that she would never find anyone who would want her, that she would end up alone and desperate with no options left. "You are not alone anymore," Andrew said. "And you never have to be desperate again. Whatever else this marriage becomes, I promise you that you will always have a home and security." "I want it to become more than just security," Victoria said softly. "I want us to be happy together. I want to build a true partnership." "So do I." They were very close now, their faces inches apart in the firelight. Andrew reached up and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "May I kiss you properly? Not the polite peck I gave you during the ceremony, but a real kiss." Victoria's heart was beating fast, but she nodded. "Yes." He kissed her gently at first, giving her time to adjust, to learn the feel of his lips against hers. Then, when she leaned into him, responding to his touch, the kiss deepened into something more passionate and seeking. Victoria felt heat unfurl in her belly, felt her hands come up to rest against his chest, feeling the solid warmth of him beneath her palms. When they finally broke apart, both breathing harder, Andrew rested his forehead against hers. "Perhaps we should retire," he said, his voice rough. "Together, if you are willing, but with the understanding that we will only do what feels right for both of us." Victoria nodded, not trusting her voice. They went to the bedroom, the one Andrew had prepared for her, but which was now theirs to share. In the privacy of their room, with lamplight casting soft shadows, they came together as husband and wife, learning each other with gentleness and patience, creating the foundation for a marriage that would, with time and care, become something deeper than either of them had initially imagined possible. The winter weeks that followed were a time of adjustment and discovery. Mrs. Henderson remained with them until her arm had healed sufficiently for travel, serving as both guest and inadvertent chaperone. She proved to be excellent company, full of stories and practical wisdom, and Victoria found herself genuinely sad when the day came for Mrs. Henderson to continue her journey to visit her son. "You are going to be fine, girl," Mrs. Henderson said as they prepared the wagon for her departure. You have found yourself a good man, and you are strong enough to make a good life here. Do not forget that you walked through a blizzard to survive. You can handle anything ranch life throws at you." "Thank you for everything," Victoria said, embracing the older woman carefully so as not to jar her healing arm. "I am glad we met, even under such terrible circumstances." "So am I. You saved my life, Victoria Fletcher. I will not forget that." After Mrs. Henderson left, Victoria and Andrew settled into the rhythms of ranch life. Victoria threw herself into learning everything she could about her new role. She learned to manage the household efficiently, to plan meals around what was available and in season, to preserve and store food for the long Kansas winters. She learned to milk the cow, gather eggs from the chickens, and tend the kitchen garden that would provide vegetables come spring. Andrew proved to be a patient teacher and an attentive husband. He showed her the workings of the ranch, introducing her to each horse by name, explaining the breeding program he was developing for his cattle, walking her through the various pastures and structures that made up their property. He consulted her on decisions, asked her opinion on purchases and plans, and made it clear through word and deed that he truly did view her as a partner. In the quiet evenings, they continued the practice they had started on their wedding night, sitting by the fire and talking about everything and nothing. These conversations allowed them to continue learning about each other, to share thoughts and dreams and fears in a way that built genuine intimacy. Victoria found herself falling in love with her husband, truly in love in a way she had not anticipated when she agreed to this arrangement. It was not the dramatic, thunderous love of romantic novels, but something quieter and deeper. A steady growing affection built on respect, shared labor, laughter, and increasingly passionate nights together. She thought Andrew might be falling in love with her too, though he had not said the words. She saw it in the way he looked at her when he thought she was not paying attention, in the small, thoughtful gestures he made, in the way he always made sure she was comfortable and happy. Spring came late to Kansas that year, the winter lingering far longer than usual. But finally, in late March, the snow began to melt in earnest, revealing the brown grass beneath and bringing the promise of warmth and growth. Andrew and his men began preparing for the busy season ahead, calving, branding, planting, and all the endless work that came with running a ranch. Victoria stood on the porch one morning in early April, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. She placed a hand on her stomach, feeling the subtle changes that had been happening over the past few weeks. She had not mentioned anything to Andrew yet, wanting to be certain before she raised his hopes, but she was fairly sure now. She was pregnant. They were going to have a child. The realization filled her with a complex mixture of joy and fear. She wanted children, wanted to give Andrew the family he longed for, but she was also terrified of all the things that could go wrong. Women died in childbirth all the time, especially out here in remote areas far from doctors and hospitals. Mourning. Andrew's voice came from behind her, and she felt his arms wrap around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. "You are up early." "I could not sleep. Too much on my mind. Want to talk about it." This was the moment. She could tell him, share her suspicion and her fear. Or she could wait until she was more certain, until the fear had time to settle into acceptance. But they were partners, and partners shared burdens as well as joys. "Andrew, I think I might be pregnant." She felt him go very still behind her. Then he turned her around gently, his hands on her shoulders, his eyes searching her face. "Are you certain?" "Not completely. But the signs are there. I have missed my courses and I have been feeling nauseated in the mornings. I wanted to wait to tell you until I was more sure, but I cannot keep it to myself any longer." A slow smile spread across Andrew's face, transforming his features into an expression of such pure joy that it made Victoria's heart clench. "We are going to have a baby. It appears so. If I am right, the baby should arrive sometime in October." Andrew pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "Victoria, this is wonderful news, the best news, I cannot believe." He pulled back, looking suddenly concerned. "Are you happy about this? I know we have only been married a few months. If you are worried or scared, we can talk about it." "I am both happy and scared," Victoria admitted. "I want this baby. I want to give you children and have a family together. But Andrew, childbirth is dangerous. Women die. And we are so far from town, from any doctor. Hey." He cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Nothing is going to happen to you. We will make sure Doc Miller checks on you regularly. We will prepare everything necessary. And when the time comes, we will get you through this safely. I did not search through a blizzard to find you only to lose you now." His certainty was comforting, even if Victoria knew that determination alone could not prevent the dangers of childbirth. But she let herself lean into his strength, accepting the comfort he offered. The months that followed were busy and full. Word spread through the community about Victoria's pregnancy, and she found herself on the receiving end of advice from every woman within 20 miles. Some of it was useful, much of it was contradictory, and all of it came from a place of genuine caring that touched Victoria deeply. She had not realized how lonely she had been in Boston, isolated by her father's debts and her family's rejection. Here in Kansas, she had found a community that welcomed her and supported her. She became friends with Sarah Morrison, the sheriff's wife, who had 3 children of her own and was happy to share her experience. She grew close to Martha Davies, who ran the general store in Hayes City with her husband, and who knew everything about everyone and loved to talk. As her belly swelled with the growing baby, Victoria found herself settling into her new life more completely. This was her home now, this ranch on the Kansas plains. These were her people, this patchwork community of ranchers and farmers and townspeople who looked out for each other in a harsh land. And Andrew was her husband, her partner, her friend, and increasingly the man she loved more than she had thought possible. She had not told him she loved him yet. The words felt too big, too important to say casually. She was waiting for the right moment, though she was not sure what that moment would look like. Summer came hot and dry, and Victoria spent much of her time trying to stay cool in the house while Andrew and his men worked long days managing the ranch. In the evenings, Andrew would return dusty and exhausted, and Victoria would have supper ready and water heated for washing. They would eat together, talking about their days, and then sit on the porch as the evening cooled, watching the sunset and feeling the baby kick beneath Victoria's hand. "Strong kicks," Andrew would say, his hand joining hers on her belly. "Going to be a fighter, this one." "Like his or her mother," Victoria would reply, and Andrew would smile and kiss her temple. In September, as Victoria grew increasingly uncomfortable and eager for the pregnancy to be over, Andrew began making preparations for the birth. He convinced Doc Miller to stay at the ranch for the final 2 weeks before the baby was due, just in case. He arranged for Sarah Morrison to come stay as well, to help with the delivery and care for Victoria afterward. "You are being overprotective," Victoria protested, though she was secretly grateful for all his efforts. "I am being appropriately cautious," Andrew corrected. "You are the most important person in my life, Victoria. I am not taking any chances." The words were sweet, but Victoria found herself wishing he would say he loved her. He showed it in 1,000 ways, but he had never actually spoken the words. And she, equally stubborn, had not said them either, each waiting for the other to go first. On October 15th, 2 weeks before the baby was due, Victoria woke in the middle of the night to a sharp, cramping pain. At first, she thought it was just the discomfort that had been plaguing her for weeks, but when the pain came again a few minutes later, she realized what was happening. "Andrew," she said, shaking his shoulder. "Andrew, wake up. The baby is coming." He was awake instantly, alert despite the late hour. "Are you sure? It is too early. Babies come when they want to, not when we schedule them. Wake Doc Miller and Sarah. This is happening." The next several hours were a blur of pain and effort. Sarah and Doc Miller attended her while Andrew paced in the main room, unable to stay still or focus on anything except what was happening in the bedroom. Tom and Charlie had been sent away to the bunkhouse, spared from the drama of childbirth. Victoria had known childbirth would be difficult, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of it. The pain was overwhelming, coming in waves that left her gasping and crying out despite her attempts to stay quiet. Sarah held her hand and offered encouragement while Doc Miller monitored her progress. "You are doing fine," Sarah kept saying. "Just breathe through it. You are doing great." But as the hours stretched on and the pain intensified, Victoria began to fear that something was wrong. She could see the concern in Doc Miller's eyes, even as he tried to maintain a calm demeanor. "The baby is in a difficult position," he finally admitted. "We need to get it turned, or this could become dangerous." "Do what you need to do," Victoria gasped out between contractions. "Just save my baby." What followed was agony beyond anything Victoria had experienced. Doc Miller worked to manually turn the baby, and Victoria screamed, unable to hold back the sounds of pain. In the main room, Andrew heard his wife's screams and felt like his heart was being ripped from his chest. He wanted to go to her, to help somehow, but Sarah had barred him from the room, insisting that he would only be in the way. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Doc Miller succeeded in turning the baby. "That is it," he said with satisfaction. "Now we can get this little one delivered proper." Victoria had no strength left, but somehow she found reserves she did not know she possessed. She pushed when Doc Miller told her to push, breathed when he told her to breathe, and at last, as the first light of dawn crept through the windows, she felt the baby slip free from her body. A thin, angry wail filled the room and Victoria collapsed back against the pillows, tears streaming down her face. "You have a son," Doc Miller announced, holding up the squalling infant. "A healthy baby boy." Sarah was crying too, laughing as she wiped her eyes. "He is beautiful, Victoria." "Just perfect." Doc Miller cleaned the baby and wrapped him in a soft blanket, then placed him in Victoria's arms. Victoria looked down at the tiny face, the eyes squinted shut, the mouth open in continued protest at being forced into the world, and felt her heart expand with a love so fierce it took her breath away. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "I am your mother. And I promise I will always keep you safe." The bedroom door opened and Andrew entered cautiously, his face pale with worry. "Victoria, are you all right? I heard you screaming and I thought—" "I am fine," Victoria assured him. "We are both fine. Come meet your son." Andrew approached the bed slowly, his eyes fixed on the bundle in Victoria's arms. When he looked down at the baby, his expression transformed into wonder. "He is so small," Andrew breathed. "So perfect. Does he have a name?" Victoria and Andrew had discussed names over the past months, but had not settled on anything definite. Now, looking at her son, Victoria knew exactly what his name should be. "His name is Marcus Thomas Fletcher," she said. "After my father and yours." Andrew's eyes grew bright with unshed tears. "Marcus Thomas Fletcher. It is a strong name for what I am sure will be a strong man." He looked up at Victoria, and the love in his eyes was unmistakable. "Victoria, I have to tell you something. I should have said it weeks ago, months ago even, but I was waiting for the right moment and then I was afraid, and now I realize there is no perfect moment. There is just this moment right now with you and our son. Victoria, I love you. I am in love with you. Not because you are my wife or because you just gave me a son, but because you are you. Brave, strong, smart, stubborn, wonderful you. I love you with everything in me. Victoria felt tears spill over, happiness mixing with exhaustion and relief. I love you too, Andrew. I have loved you for months but was too afraid to say it. I was waiting for you to say it first. Andrew laughed, a sound of pure joy. We are both fools then. All this time wasted when we could have been saying it to each other every day. He leaned down and kissed her gently. I love you, Victoria Fletcher, and I will tell you every day for the rest of our lives. The next weeks were an adjustment as Victoria recovered from the birth, and they both learned how to care for an infant. Marcus was a healthy baby with a good appetite and powerful lungs that he used frequently during the night. Victoria spent her days feeding and changing and soothing the baby, while Andrew tried to balance ranch work with spending as much time as possible with his new son. I cannot believe how much I love him, Andrew confessed one evening as he held the sleeping baby, marveling at the tiny fingers wrapped around his thumb. I would do anything for him, anything to keep him safe and happy. That is what it means to be a parent, Victoria said, watching them with a smile. Though I confess I am exhausted, I had no idea babies required so much attention. He will settle into a routine eventually, Andrew assured her, and as he gets older it will become easier. As winter approached once again, almost exactly a year since Victoria had arrived in Kansas and nearly died in a blizzard, she found herself reflecting on how much had changed. A year ago, she had been alone, scared, and desperate, traveling to marry a stranger because she had no other options. Now she was surrounded by love, with a husband who adored her and a son who depended on her, living in a home she had helped build and maintain, part of a community that had embraced her. What are you thinking about? Andrew asked, coming up behind her as she stood at the window, watching the first snowflakes of the season begin to fall. Marcus was asleep in his cradle nearby. I am thinking about a year ago, Victoria said, about the blizzard and how close I came to dying. Andrew's arms wrapped around her, holding her close. That was the night I found my heart, he said softly. I did not know it at the time, but when I found you in that cabin, I found the most important thing in my life. You, Victoria, you are my heart. She turned in his arms, looking up at him with eyes that still, after months of marriage, made his breath catch. And you are mine, you and Marcus both, my two hearts. They kissed as the snow fell outside, their son sleeping peacefully nearby, and Victoria knew with absolute certainty that she had found her place in the world. This ranch, this man, this life, they were hers, chosen and claimed and fought for. She had walked through a blizzard to reach this life, and it had been worth every frozen step. The years that followed were full and happy. Andrew and Victoria added 3 more children to their family. A daughter they named Caroline Rose when Marcus was 2, twin boys named James and Henry when Marcus was 5, and a final daughter named Sarah Elizabeth when Marcus was 8. The house, which had once seemed spacious for just 2 people, became delightfully chaotic with 5 children running through its rooms. Victoria proved to be an excellent mother, patient and loving but firm when necessary. She taught all her children to read and write, conducting informal lessons at the kitchen table every morning. Andrew expanded the ranch, building onto the house to accommodate their growing family and adding more land and cattle to his holdings. They faced challenges, of course. There were bad winters and dry summers. Years when money was tight and worry kept them awake at night. There were childhood illnesses that terrified them both, particularly when young James contracted scarlet fever at age 3 and they nearly lost him. There were disagreements and arguments, the normal friction of two strong-willed people sharing a life. But through it all, they held firm to what they had found that winter night when Andrew had searched through a blizzard and found Victoria half frozen in an abandoned cabin. They had found each other, had found love in the most unlikely circumstances, and they nurtured that love carefully through all the years that followed. Marcus grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved the ranch and the animals, clearly destined to follow in his father's footsteps. Caroline was wild and adventurous, more interested in riding horses than learning to sew, much to her mother's amusement. The twins were inseparable and mischievous, always getting into some scrape or another. And little Sarah was sweet and gentle, the baby of the family, adored by everyone. On the 15th anniversary of their wedding, Andrew and Victoria stood on their porch as they had so many times before, watching the sunset paint the Kansas sky in brilliant colors. Their children were inside, presumably doing their evening chores but more likely causing some form of chaos that they would have to deal with shortly. 15 years, Victoria mused. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I arrived here half frozen. Other times it feels like I've always been here, like my life in Boston was just a dream. Any regrets? Andrew asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Not a single one. Oh, there are things I might have done differently, decisions I question in hindsight. But choosing to answer your advertisement, choosing to marry you, choosing this life. Never. This is exactly where I am supposed to be. I feel the same. You know, I often think about that night I rode out into the storm. Tom and Charlie thought I was crazy. Maybe I was. But something told me I had to go, had to search. I did not know I was searching for my heart, but that is what I found. Victoria leaned into him, fitting perfectly into his arms after 15 years of practice. You saved my life that night. And you saved mine, though I did not realize it until later. I was so lonely before you came, Victoria. I had land and success and good friends, but I was lonely in a way that nothing could fill. Then you arrived, and suddenly everything made sense. Suddenly I understood what I had been building this ranch for, to give our family a home, to create something that would last beyond my lifetime. We have done that, Victoria said, looking out at the land they had worked together to maintain and improve. This ranch will be here for our children and their children. We have built something that will last. From inside the house came a crash and raised voices, followed by Marcus yelling, "Caroline, you cannot bring a snake into the house," Victoria sighed. And on that note, I believe we are needed inside. Andrew laughed, the sound warm and full of contentment. Welcome to family life. They went inside together, hand in hand, to deal with whatever crisis Caroline had precipitated this time. It was chaotic and messy, and sometimes frustrating, but it was theirs, this life they had built from desperation and determination and unlikely love. As Victoria helped Marcus remove the offending snake from the house, while Andrew lectured Caroline on appropriate places for wildlife, she felt a profound sense of gratitude for the path her life had taken. That terrifying night lost in the snow, the desperate walk through the blizzard, the near-death experience, all of it had led her here to this moment, this family, this love. She had been lost in the snow, and Andrew had searched all night and found her. But more than that, they had found each other, had found the love that would sustain them through everything life threw at them, had found their hearts in the most unlikely place and circumstance imaginable. And that, Victoria thought as she caught Andrew's eye across the room and saw him smile at her with undiminished affection after 15 years of marriage, was the greatest gift she could have ever received. Better than security, better than comfort, better than anything she had dared to hope for when she stepped onto that stagecoach in Boston so many years ago. She had found her home, her purpose, her heart. And it had all started with a blizzard, a desperate walk, and a cowboy who refused to give up, who rode into a storm to search for a woman he had never met, and in doing so found the other half of his soul. Years continued to pass, and the Fletcher family became a fixture in the Hayes City community. Andrew served on the town council and helped organize the formation of a proper school so that all the children in the area could receive education. Victoria became known for her charity work, organizing aid for families who fell on hard times and serving as a midwife for women in the area who lacked access to medical care. As their children grew into adulthood, Andrew and Victoria saw their legacy taking shape. Marcus married a local girl named Elizabeth and took over much of the day-to-day operation of the ranch, building a house on the property for his own growing family. Caroline, true to her adventurous spirit, moved to Denver with her husband, a journalist, where she wrote articles about life in the West. The twins went into business together, opening a feed store in Hayes City that served the surrounding ranching community. And Sarah, their youngest, became a teacher, fulfilling the dream her mother had once harbored for herself. On their 30th wedding anniversary, Andrew and Victoria hosted a party at the ranch for family and friends. The house was full of people, noise, and laughter. Their children and their spouses, their 9 grandchildren running wild through the rooms, friends from town, ranch hands past and present. It was everything they had worked for, this abundance of life and love. Late in the evening, after most of the guests had departed, and the grandchildren had been tucked into beds throughout the house, Andrew and Victoria found themselves once again on their porch, watching the stars come out in the vast Kansas sky. "Quite a party," Andrew said, settling into the rocking chair he had built when their first grandchild was born. "It was wonderful," Victoria agreed, taking the chair beside his and reaching over to clasp his hand. "Though I am exhausted. We are getting old," Andrew observed with a smile. "Speak for yourself." "I am in my prime," Victoria retorted, but she was smiling too. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the kind of silence that only comes from decades of knowing each other, of being so comfortable in each other's presence that words are not always necessary. "I was thinking today," Andrew finally said, "about the day you arrived. How terrified I was that I would not find you, that you would die out there in the snow. I was thinking about that too, and about how strange it is that the worst day of my life led to the best years of my life. If the stagecoach had not crashed, if there had been no storm, we would have met under very different circumstances. I wonder if we still would have fallen in love." "I like to think we would have," Andrew said, "but I am glad we did not have to find out. I am glad everything happened exactly as it did, because it led us here." "To this moment," Victoria agreed, "to every moment, to 30 years of moments and hopefully many more to come." Victoria squeezed his hand. "I love you, Andrew Fletcher. Just as much today as I did on the day I realized it, maybe more. And I love you, Victoria Fletcher. You are still my heart, still the best thing that ever happened to me." They sat together under the stars, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely way, who had built a life and a family and a legacy from mail-order marriage and desperate circumstances. They were older now, grayer and slower, but the love between them had only deepened with time. The years continued their march, bringing changes both welcome and difficult. Andrew developed arthritis that made ranch work harder, and Victoria's eyesight weakened, making her beloved reading more challenging. But they adapted, adjusted, supported each other through the inevitable challenges of aging. They celebrated the birth of each new grandchild with joy, and mourned together when Andrew's oldest friend Tom passed away suddenly from a heart ailment. They watched their children navigate their own challenges and triumphs, offering advice when asked and biting their tongues when not. On their 40th wedding anniversary, the family gathered once again, this time for a more subdued celebration that acknowledged Andrew and Victoria's advancing years. Marcus gave a toast that brought tears to everyone's eyes. "My parents," he said, raising his glass, "are the example I try to follow in my own marriage. They have shown all of us what it means to truly commit to another person, to work together through good times and bad, to build something lasting." They met under the most dramatic circumstances imaginable, and they have lived a life worthy of that dramatic beginning. To Andrew and Victoria Fletcher, may you have many more years together. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home or to bed, Andrew and Victoria made their way slowly to their bedroom. Movement was harder now for both of them, and they helped each other with a practiced ease that came from decades of partnership. As they settled into bed, Victoria turned to Andrew with a smile. 40 years. Can you believe it? Barely. Sometimes I still feel like that nervous young rancher waiting for his mail-order bride to arrive. And I still feel like that terrified girl walking through a blizzard, hoping someone would find her before she froze to death. "I will always find you," Andrew said, pulling her close. "No matter how lost you are, I will always search until I find you." "I know," Victoria whispered. "You proved that 39 years ago, and you have been proving it every day since." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, still in love after 40 years, still each other's hearts, still grateful for the storm that had brought them together and the cowboy who had refused to give up searching. As the years advanced further and both Andrew and Victoria moved into their 70s, they began to think about the legacy they would leave. The ranch would go to Marcus, who had already been running it for years with his father's guidance. Their other children were settled and successful in their own ways. Their grandchildren, now numbering 14, were growing into fine young adults who would carry the family forward into the next generation. "We have done well," Andrew said one evening as they reviewed the will they were updating with the help of their lawyer. "Our children are settled, the ranch is secure. Everything we worked for is in good hands." "Yes," Victoria agreed, "though I confess I am not quite ready to let go yet. I still have too much life left to live." Andrew smiled. "Good. Because I am not ready to lose you, we still have more years to add to our story." And they did have more years, several of them, each one precious and cherished. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. It was a grand affair, the celebration of a love that had endured half a century and showed no signs of weakening. When Andrew passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 79, Victoria was devastated. They had been together for 53 years, and she felt as though half of herself had been torn away. But she was surrounded by family who loved her, and she found comfort in the legacy they had built together. She lived for 3 more years, spending her time surrounded by her family, telling stories about Andrew and their life together to grandchildren and great-grandchildren who listened with rapt attention. She never tired of telling the story of how she had been lost in the snow and how Andrew had searched all night until he found her. "He saved my life that night," she would say. "But more than that, he gave me a life worth living. He gave me love, family, purpose. He gave me everything. Victoria passed away in the spring of her 82nd year, sitting in her rocking chair on the porch she had loved, watching the sunrise over the Kansas plains. She was surrounded by family, and her last words were, "I am coming, Andrew. Wait for me." The Fletcher family buried her beside Andrew on a small rise overlooking the ranch, beneath a simple headstone that read, Victoria Greene Fletcher, 1860–1942, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother. She walked through a storm and found her home. And beside it, Andrew's stone, Andrew Fletcher, 1856–1939, beloved husband, father, and grandfather. He searched through a blizzard and found his heart. The ranch remained in the Fletcher family for generations, passed down from parent to child, each new generation adding their own chapters to the story, while honoring the legacy of Andrew and Victoria. The story of the mail-order bride who was lost in the snow and the cowboy who searched all night to find her became a family legend, told and retold, a reminder of where the Fletcher family began and the love that had founded everything that came after. In Hays City, a small historical marker was eventually placed near the site of the old abandoned cabin where Andrew had found Victoria, commemorating the story and the family that had become such an integral part of the community's history. Tourists would occasionally stop to read the marker, to imagine the blizzard and the desperate search and the love that had blossomed from such unlikely circumstances. But for the Fletcher family, it was more than just a story or a historical footnote. It was the foundation of everything they were, the proof that love could flourish in the harshest conditions, that two people could come together as strangers and build something beautiful and lasting. It was a reminder that sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead to the best, that desperation and courage can transform into joy and contentment. Marcus Fletcher, now an old man himself, would sometimes bring his own grandchildren to the family cemetery, to stand before the graves of Andrew and Victoria and tell them the story one more time. Your great-great-grandfather rode out into a blizzard to search for a woman he had never met, Marcus would say. He could have stayed safe and warm in his house. No one would have blamed him, but something told him he needed to go, needed to search. And when he found her, when he found Victoria, he found his heart. That is what he always said. I found my heart. And they loved each other for 53 years, through everything life threw at them. That is the legacy they left us, the example of what true love looks like, of what commitment and partnership really mean. They gave us this ranch, yes, but more than that, they gave us a model for how to live, how to love, how to build something that lasts. And the children would listen, wide-eyed, to the story of their ancestors, absorbing the lesson that had been passed down through generations. That love is worth fighting for, that sometimes the greatest treasures are found in the most unlikely places, and that a cowboy and a mail-order bride could build an empire of love that would last far beyond their own lifetimes. The story of Andrew and Victoria Fletcher became woven into the fabric of Hays City history, a tale told whenever people gathered to share stories of the old days, of the Wild West, of the men and women who had carved civilization out of the harsh Kansas plains. It was a story of love and courage, of determination and luck, of two souls finding each other against all odds. And it all began with a stagecoach that crashed in a blizzard, a woman brave enough to walk into a storm, and a cowboy who refused to give up searching. It began with Andrew Fletcher saying, as he held Victoria for the first time, I found my heart. And it endured through 53 years of marriage, 5 children, 14 grandchildren, and countless great-grandchildren. It endured because they chose each other, every single day, through every challenge and triumph. That was the real secret, the lesson that Victoria and Andrew had taught through their lives. That love is not just a feeling or a moment, but a choice made repeatedly, a commitment renewed daily, a partnership built through shared labor and mutual respect. They had started with nothing but letters and hope, and they had built a legacy that would last for generations. And somewhere, perhaps, in whatever comes after this life, Andrew and Victoria Fletcher were together again, still holding hands, still each other's hearts, still grateful for the storm that had brought them together and the love that had sustained them through a lifetime and beyond. The end was not really an end at all, but simply another chapter in a love story that had transcended time, place, and even death itself. The Fletcher Ranch stood for over a century after Victoria's death, a testament to everything Andrew and Victoria had built. And though the world changed around it, though Kansas transformed from wild frontier to settled farmland to modern state, the story remained, passed down, cherished, remembered. The mail-order bride lost in the snow. The cowboy who searched all night. The love that grew from desperation and determination into something beautiful and enduring. It was, in the end, exactly the kind of love story that the Wild West had always promised. Dramatic, dangerous, and ultimately triumphant, proving that even in the harshest conditions, love could not just survive but thrive. Andrew Fletcher had ridden into a blizzard and found his heart. Victoria Greene had walked through a storm and found her home. And together, they had created something far greater than either of them could have achieved alone. A family, a legacy, and a love story for the ages.